So, as we wrap up our lessons on the Great Depression in the 1930s, lesson four is going to be a review for those of you that took world history last year. For those of you that didn't, and maybe this is new information, basically, this lesson is going to be setting the scene for how the world will end up in another war. I recommend that you do the Ed puzzle on the rise of totalitarianism that's linked in this assignment because it'll connect really. It does a great job at connecting it how the Treaty of Versailles, which is the treaty that ends World War One, will then kind of put the seeds down for what will eventually become World War Two. So, totalitarianism is going to be a new form of government that emerges into the 1920s and 1930s. So, here is some imagery that might come to mind when we think of totalitarianism. Some of these leaders might look familiar, some of these symbols might look familiar, but if not, I'm going to review them and explain them. So, our objectives for this lesson is to explain how parts of the world fell into totalitarian regimes as economic crises occurred. So just as the United States was experiencing economic depression, so was the rest of the world. We're also going to examine the different forms of fascism, comparing Germany and Italy against one another. And then later on at the end of the lesson, we're going to look at how anti Semitism was a foundation of Nazism and eventually leads to the Holocaust. So, the essential understandings that I want you to bring into this lesson. Economic disruptions following World War I led to unstable political conditions. You also have in parts of Europe where the losers of World War I, Germany, Austria Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and then later on Russia, have huge political upheaval. Their empires essentially collapse. So, kind of what is left in its place, and who is going to fill the void that these empires had held for hundreds of years. Worldwide economic depression in the 1930s is going to provide that opportunity to fill that void. We will see dictators in red here, important vocabulary word for this lesson, that will rise in the Soviet Union, Italy, Germany, and Japan. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, worsened the economic and political conditions in Europe and led to the rise of these regimes. And then we'll look at how Japan emerges as a world's power after World War I, and they conducted very aggressive imperialistic policies throughout Asia. So, a couple vocabulary words here that are important. Fascism. This is an ideology or attitude that favors dictatorial government. Dictatorial government, again, dictator, one power, one person, okay? They centralize all control of private business, private enterprise. They repress or tear down or hold down any type of opposition and have extreme nationalism where you're very proud of your country. We'll see the rise of Marxist Leninist communism. This is a version of a classless society where capitalism is overthrown by the working class and the state and government controls and owns all wealth and property. Then we'll see that shift with Stalin. This is the Marxist Leninist communism is what rises to the Soviet Union. Then we'll have communism beginning with Stalin, where any system of government, or the Soviet Union, where a single totalitarian party holds power and the state controls all aspects of the economy. So let's look at totalitarianism. So this is the first question on your guided notes. Who would you vote for if I described three different leaders to you? Would you vote for the first person, who's a womanizer, which means they're, not great towards women? They have self-interested policies and unfortunately suffer from ailing health or failing health. Contestant 2 has a drinking habit and a defiant tongue, defiant attitude. Or might you consider contestant 3, who's a decorated war hero, doesn't drink, and wants to create a stable economy? So if you had to pick between these three leaders, who would be the obvious choice you would select? So put that down on your guided notes and you can pause here. All right, now let's reveal who these contestants are. Contestant 1, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States. Contestant 2, Winston Churchill, who will become the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And the winner that you probably selected was contestant 3, who shockingly was actually Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi parties. Now, that might sound surprising, but we'll talk about how Hitler was totalitarian and not all the things that I described him as in the slide earlier. Okay. And contestant 1 and 2, even though those two men in their private lives might not seem like someone you want as a leader, they actually emerge as the amazing leaders that they were as we move into World War II. Okay, so we have the Treaty of Versailles concludes World War I in 1920. Okay, fast forward, to Black Tuesday in 1929, the stock market crashes. This plunges the United States and the world into the Great Depression. This allows for, people are looking for things to solve their problems, they're concerned, they're poor, and this leads to an increase um, of new political parties that emphasize state control, that the government or the state should control all things. And this will lead to total control of a country by a dictator, which gets us totalitarianism. So I know that looks like a really long word, but just look at the first 5 letters, total. A dictator has total power in these countries. Whatever they say goes. So let's look closer at totalitarianism itself. Government establishes complete control of all aspects of the state. So, political, military, economy, social, cultural. The state controls all decisions. Highly nationalistic. Flags, salutes, rallies, uniforms. Everything is like, this extreme for country attitude. There are very strict controls and laws on the people. Basically, there is a military state. There are secret police watching people's every move. The army and military are the most important people in the state. Things are censored, which means they are blocked. Information is blocked. Any literature, writing, anything that's a different idea than what the dictator wants is censored. It is not allowed to be seen. So how does the dictator get people on their side? Well, they love to use propaganda, okay? Through the media, through radio, through newspapers, through posters. The leader is typically somebody that is very charismatic, that has like a very over the top personality, and they need people to totally conform to their ideas. And they survive on terror and fear. So this chart, and you don't have to do like a hugely deep dive into this, is just kind of showing the different types of totalitarian power out there. But as we move into World War II, really the ones that you're going to focus on are these 3 that you see here: Nazism, fascism, and communism. What do they all have in common? Okay, they are all forms of totalitarianism. Okay, so I believe on your notes it asks that what 3 things, what 3 ideologies have totalitarianism in common? It's these 3 right here. Okay. They're different theories, however, they all kind of have the same behavior. So, what makes something communist? Joseph Stalin is the leader of the Soviet Union from 1922 to 1953 when he passes away. It is a very left wing philosophy. It starts with the theologies of a man named Karl Marx. It is a political, economic, and social system that creates a society without classes. So there's no upper class, middle class, or lower class. Everyone is on the same page because the state owns and controls everything. So they own the land, they own factories. So everything that's produced is controlled by the government. So to get your food, you go to the government. To get housing, you go to the government. To get jobs, you go to the government. They control everything. But when Stalin takes over, he takes this idea and makes it much more totalitarian by using the military. Okay, he had secret police that helped him, and you'll kind of get this on the next page. He crushed opponents. He held absolute authority. He had some new economic policies, but he also had things like great purges. Secret police would kill thousands of officers and people who opposed Stalin. He would send people to Siberia, to prison camps, which is basically like a freezing cold, below zero desert. People would just disappear. If you didn't follow what Stalin said, you probably would be imprisoned and killed. But for Stalin's sake, he also sees the rising power of Germany as we move into the late 1930s, and he becomes concerned about this. So, fascism is another form of totalitarianism. I almost should title this lesson "I Got an Ism" because I'm going to say it a lot today. So, fun fact: fascism was derived from fascis or fasces, which is an ancient Roman symbol of authority consisting of a bundle of rods and an axe. So, this is the totalitarian government that is formed in Italy. Okay, Benito Mussolini is their leader. This is a very right wing idea where you have intense nationalism and elitism, total control. The interests of the state is more important than you as an individual. Everything is for the country, for Italy. Um, he maintained class systems and private ownership, all goes through the government as well. The one thing about Mussolini, he was kind of a showman. Like, so as you were walking through the streets, you'd be hearing his voice, like on speakers, like all this constant propaganda. So it like not only do the thing about fascism, not only is he looking to control your mind, he's looking to control your heart. That's the big thing to remember about totalitarianism. He centralized all power in himself as leader. He wanted to restore the glory of Rome. This is going to be another thing that we'll see in common between all these leaders. There was a time that they see that their nation was great, and he wants to bring them back to it. He invades Ethiopia, and then he also later establishes an alliance with Hitler. Moving east to Japan, this is Emperor Hirohito. So the Japanese military was really in charge. Okay, so you're going to meet the leader of the military on the next slide. But Emperor Hirohito was seen by the Japanese people as a godlike figure. The military and controlled everything. They wanted more land, wanted to seize new territories, and take control of resources. What were some resources that they would want? Coal, timber, iron ore, oil, control of China to get those things. So the first place they invade during this time period is the Chinese state of Manchuria. So even though Hirohito was the godlike figure of the government, really the government was commanded by Hideki Tojo. So the goals and ideas of Japan, the military took control. Hirohito could not stand up to the powerful generals, but he was worshipped by the people, so they often fought in his name. Whatever the emperor said, people would do because they believed they were getting their message from God. Um, in order to be a military society, you need extreme industrialization. So, this lent to a drive for raw materials. So, how do you get those? Just like we talked about in the late 1800s, early 1900s, imperialism, taking over land in faraway places that has the raw materials you need. So, over a decade, Korea, Manchuria, and the rest of China are slowly invaded by Japan. The League of Nations is not able to do anything to stop this, which just encourages the Japanese under Tojo and Hirohito to do more. Lastly, we're going to talk about Nazism. So, Adolf Hitler is the leader of the Nazi Party. This, much like fascism, very right wing. Nazi stands for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They believe in racial superiority of the Aryan master race. So they believe that them as Germans was the most racially superior of the world. And they believe that all Germans should have some sort of living space in Europe. They have a violent hatred towards Jewish people and blame Germany's problems on them. More on that later. So there is Hitler, okay, who writes his manifesto called Mein Kampf, that dictates kind of what he sees as his vision for Germany. Um, in Hitler's Germany, inflation and depression actually allowed for Hitler to take power. The democratic government, the Weimar Republic that was put in after World War I, is severely weakened by the depression, inflation, also the things that they had to do as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. So, what does he believe? He believes in anti Semitism, which is where Jewish people are persecuted, or at least like discriminated against, attacked. It's very much anti Jewish people. Nazis practice extreme nationalism, aggression. So they begin to try to occupy and invade nearby countries in order to get that land space. His goal was to unite all German-speaking people in Europe together. So one of the first groups he makes alliances with, other than Italy, is Austria, because many of Austrians are German-speaking as well. So, how did anti Semitism become part of the Nazi ideology? Well, remember, at this time, people are going through Great Depression, okay, economic troubles, having struggling time feeding their families. So, you look to a scapegoat. In order for Hitler to gain power, he utilized fear. He told German people, look at the Jewish people. They are successful, they have businesses, they're stealing your money, they're stealing from you. So people were suspicious of Jewish people. Many Jewish people came from lots of parts of the world and there were Jewish people in all European countries. They didn't really have a homeland of their own at this time. Okay, so during times of crisis, they were the frequent scapegoats. Look at them. They're not like us. They have these businesses. They have different places of worship. They have different things. So Hitler utilized fear of people's own things they were lacking and increased this hatred and prejudice towards Jewish people. Um, so Hitler and then later his political party and the Nazis claimed that the Jewish people were a master race and that those of Jewish ancestry were inferior, as well as anyone who was not German. So, Polish people, Russians, communists, gypsies, homosexuals, anyone considered physically or mentally deficient. So, he kind of began targeting these groups of people if they were not, quote unquote, Aryan or German people as the master race. So, in the mid 1930s, once Hitler and his party seizes control of Germany, they pass what are known as the Nuremberg Laws. This takes away German citizenship to Jewish people and prevents them from marrying anyone not Jewish. They're also ordered to wear Stars of David so they could be immediately recognized in public. This leads to an expanding hatred towards Jewish people. So in 1938, we have Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass. So Nazi troops attacked Jewish businesses, synagogues, homes, and killed approximately 100 Jews. Basically, this was to try to encourage the people to do the same to the Jewish people, also to terrify the Jewish people. Many of them had known or had seen that something brutal like this was coming, but there was really nothing they could do about it because, in losing their citizenship as part of the Nuremberg laws, Hitler also said that if Jewish people wanted to leave Germany and go somewhere else, they would have to surrender all of their property, anything they owned, any of their financial wealth, anything, that they would have to surrender all of that to the government. So it kind of forced people to stay there. Because you were giving up everything you owned in order to get out. There were people that were willing to do that, but there were a lot of people who were not. So what begins as, just these laws passed in Germany eventually will expand throughout Europe by the Germans during World War II. And we'll talk about this as we get towards the end of the war. But this will eventually lead to the Holocaust, where over 6 million Jewish people and other groups are murdered by the Nazis. Okay, so the Holocaust was known as Hitler's final solution. He wanted to basically exterminate Jewish people from the world. So, as he invaded country and country and country across Europe, he would put them into concentration camps where they would die either on their way in cattle cars, or once they got to the camps, they would be exterminated with brutal experiments, mass killings in specially designed showers, or were worked extremely hard and to the point of death in working camps. So, this is what we refer to as a genocide, where one group of people is, murdered on a mass scale in order to eliminate that race or that group of people from the world. This occurred in every stage of the process of Hitler's expansion of the German Empire, but most camps were located in Germany and Poland. Um, the German Nazi soldiers would allow the strong to live once they got to these camps, as they would serve as laborers. but many women, elderly, young children, and people that were disabled would soon be killed after arriving at these concentration camps. So we'll talk more about the Holocaust as well, but that kind of became one of the things to remember is that when you see these charismatic leaders come to power, it's somebody's fault and they need somebody to blame. They need, somebody to attack that they can turn to and say, it's all their fault. It's them, attack them. And that's kind of where we see Hitler's obsession with making the German people focus this hatred on Jewish people. So you have these rulers coming to power as in the United States, Franklin Roosevelt is president. And at the time, and we'll talk about this as we get into our next lessons, the United States does not do anything about this. And we'll talk about how they remain isolated as these powers come, and then how eventually we are dragged into World War II.